I originally got the inspiration because my community in Erie was voting to pass whether they were going to allow a cannabis shop or not, and they decided not to. And I was watching all the conversation on the Erie Facebook page, and half the people were for on Facebook and the other half were talking about the crimes, the children, and a lot of propaganda that's been spread for about 100 years. As a member of the media, I believe it's our job and our role and responsibility to carry conversations in a factual and truthful way. So that inspired this event, which is an industry and public conversation. This is not just an industry event. This is not just a public event. This is an educational event for us all to talk to each other and learn more. So, I wanted to thank everybody that has helped with this event, all of our sponsors, from the station in Boulder. Thank you so much for being such a strong supporter. They have a beautiful facility. Hemp, thank you guys very much for all the plugging and promoting and sponsorship. Marijuana Industry Group, Colorado NORML, Boulder Digital Arts, Georgia Boys provided the fabulous food. If you do not know where Georgia Boys are, they are in Longmont and Frederick. They're barbecues from Georgia. Stash Logic, Lacuna, and PostNet for all supporting this event. But I also want to thank my staff, John Alberts, my operations manager, De La Vaca, my editor, and Landon Bevers, who helped me pull this together the last 2 weeks because I was going crazy. We're going to have our 5 speakers come up. This year's focus is on product usage. If you're not familiar with the Cannabis Symposium, we have them all up on our YouTube channel for Yellow Scene. The first year was on legitimization of the industry. Last year was on I'm really nervous. Every year I talk about how I hate speaking in public. So last year was on, first year was on legitimization. Last year was on regulations. We had Jared Polis last year and Jonathan Singer. And this year is on product usage. I am so truly impressed with all of the people that are speaking and the work they're doing. Up first will be John Cooper from EBU. EBU is working very hard to in the science field to make everything consistent. Consistency is their focus. So he's going to be talking about advances in technology and science. Ari Sherman of evohemp. evohemp is doing some pretty incredible work with hemp creation, but some of the work they're doing is putting their grows in the poorest places in America, and they're putting their largest grow on the Pine Ridge Reservation, working with the tribe because it is the poorest place in America. We're going to have Courtney Mathis and Kelly Perez of KindColorado. They're going to be talking about social responsibility and how this industry plays a role. Amber Bacca has Trax Team Solutions. She helps people with operations and the compliances, but she also is a teacher at the Cannabis Training School. And then we have Ashley Weber from Colorado NORML, who's going to be speaking on regulations that are coming up on the bills this year. So I'm going to turn it over. At the end of all the speakers, we're going to have a Q&A. So I'd love for you all to come around, and we're going to open it up for Q&A at the end, not after each speaker. So that's how the evening is going to go. I hope you're all enjoying the food and drink. Please eat. We have plenty of it. And I'm going to leave the stage because I really don't like being up here, and I'm going to introduce John Cooper from EBU. So wherever you are, John.
All right, good evening, everybody. Thank you. So, a couple caveats before we get going, just so that you can understand a little bit about the presentation I'm about ready to give. The first one is I am not a scientist, right? So, especially as we get to the Q&A, no big words. I'll be, probably a little bit easier, even though I probably understand a lot of it. The second thing is everything I'm going to be talking about is much more focused on the future of the industry. Right? Probably not necessarily what the industry looks like at this exact moment, but what this industry looks a lot like in 5 to 10 years from now. Like, where is this going? So anyways, the first thing, I like to cover is how the heck did I get in this industry? Because it sure as heck wasn't on my life goals, right? And, it's funny, I got approached about doing something in this space right after the legalization of rec, and honestly, my initial reaction was, there's absolutely no freaking way I'm getting into cannabis. Right? Part of it was reputational risk at the time, but honestly, my bigger challenge more than anything was I didn't trust it. Right? And I'm probably like a lot of people where, back in college and stuff, I had awesome experiences, and some of the people can't see the slides, where you're just like laughing and you're having a great time, but you also have experiences that look like this. right? It's like the dreaded, oh my God, couch lock, I can't complete a sentence type of experience, right? And, I think we've all had that. And I think the challenge that we ran, that I look at when it comes to, cannabis at the time was, when you're in your 20s, those type of experiences where you take those type of challenges, or you take something you're not sure what the experience is going to be, that's okay. But, as I moved into my 30s and I settled down, and I started having kids, I couldn't take an inconsistent psychoactive experience, right? That wouldn't be something that made a lot of sense. And so the idea of getting into an industry that I didn't trust was a big challenge. The other thing that I came to the realization of back at the time too was I wasn't sure if all the people that were out there touting all the medical benefits of cannabis, if those were true, right? Or was that just a political thing to get this passed, right? I've learned a lot. So, I started a little bit of a what if. What if it didn't have to be that way, right? What if every single time, instead of having to choose between green crack and AK-47, and I still don't know what those do, right? You could actually walk into a dispensary and choose something that just gives you the exact experience you want, right? So in other words, if you just want to be able to chill out, if you're going to go vacuum, if you're going to go out with your friends or whatever it is, you're going to get that exact same experience every single time. Right? It's like if we do the analogy of light beer, right? The important part about light beer is a little bit of the taste and stuff like that, but you know what happens when you drink one. You know what happens if you drink two. You know what happens if you drink three, right? You have that control and that trust. And if cannabis is ever going to truly go mainstream, we've got to be able to figure out how to deliver on that control and trust. And so what's interesting is if you look at the industry today, I know this is a little bit hard, we have a very simple model. People grow a strain, right? People will potentially extract that strain, and that strain then goes into a product, right? And then we get very excited about a term called full spectrum, right? Which I know a lot of people are very much into full spectrum in this audience here today. Well, I'm here to basically throw out a very big controversial statement. I believe in the entourage effect. I do not believe in full spectrum. And I know that's a very bad thing to say sometimes in this audience, right? But there's a reason for it. And there's a very good, legitimate reason that I'm actually making that statement. So, first thing I think that's really important to understand is, what are we dealing with when we're dealing with the cannabis plant? And so right here, this is a magnification of, the actual trichomes. And as most of you know in this industry, there's actually nothing inside the plant we want, right? Everything that we're looking for in this plant sits up here in these little trichome heads. Right? And inside those trichome heads, what can happen is that there's actually dozens and dozens of potentially active compounds that you're going to be putting into your body. Well, that creates chaos, right? If you introduce all these chemicals into your body at the same time, you're going to have a whole bunch of competing effects, right? And what happens is with those competing effects, you have some compounds that are doing what you want, you have some compounds that are basically neutral, and you have a lot of compounds that are actually doing the opposite of what you want. What makes it even crazier, though, and we do this in our laboratory, is that we can put this under what's called a fluorescence microscope, right? And this fluorescence microscope will give us a pretty good idea of what compounds are in each one of these trichome heads. And we can actually see trichomes that are this close to each other potentially have different compounds in them, right? So how in the world is it that we're going to create a consistent, trusted experience for end consumers when the plant itself cannot even grow these compounds consistently that close to each other? Right? It's not possible, right? That becomes one of the bigger challenges that we have in this industry. And so if we take another example of what this looks like, we have a very strong pharmacology team, one of the best pharmacology teams in the world. And if we take something like Bruce Banner, right? If so you walk into a dispensary today and you say, hey, I just need something to help me chill out, there's a good chance that that bud tender is going to say, you should take Bruce Banner, right? But if we take Bruce Banner and we put it into a double-blind study, and we start looking at how are people reacting to Bruce Banner, what are the effects and the feelings they get from it, there's actually some people that are reporting energy, right? There's some more people that are saying, yeah, this helps me really chill out, right? There's even a greater number of people that say they feel creative on it, which that's more of an uppity, right? And then you have a whole bunch of people saying this is blissful. But what's more important about this, if we look across these different batches, is that they're wildly inconsistent in terms of what people are getting. And this could be from the same dispensary, the same grow, all these type of things. It's just that the plant's growing this so wildly inconsistent. Now, part of the challenge that we're dealing with here and looking at this is that if we actually look at the chaos that we're dealing with is, probably everyone here has learned about the endocannabinoid systems and the different cannabinoids that actually come from the plant versus the ones that are creating the body. Well, we've learned a lot by just looking at these things, but we really don't know what's happening just by looking at these compounds. But what becomes even crazier is if we start looking at those compounds and how they interact in the body, we have a big challenge, right? Because the way that most of us think about pharmacology today is that, like, if you have a headache, you take ibuprofen, right? One compound's designed to solve your problem. And this is how most of big pharma works today. The problem is with cannabis, you can't really think about it that way, because that model of that one compound solving a problem doesn't work very well with cannabis. And it's because the core receptors, end of day, all this really matters is the compounds you're getting from the plant are interacting with the cell. What's happening there? Right? And what's happening is we're dealing with these things that are called G-coupled protein receptors, which I swear is not going to be on the test later. But these G-coupled protein receptors are collecting lots of different compounds. And depending on that combination of compounds, you're going to have a dramatically different result. Right? And so slight variations that you have in the plant are going to create this chaotic environment. So the question is then, how do you solve that problem? We know that we can't take a straight extract and create a product. We already know, based on these G-coupled protein receptors, that we can't just use a single compound to solve things. The traditional pharmaceutical way of solving things is not going to work. And so what we strongly believe the future model is going to look like is you're going to be growing strains, right? Some of them we're going to talk about are going to be very different than what is in the marketplace today. Not only are we going to extract them, but we're going to isolate out each one of these compounds, right? So we're going to have a bucket full of THC, just pure THC. Bucket full of CBD, but that's not where it ends. You're gonna have buckets of CBG and CBC and CBGV and CBCV and CBT, CBL, all of these different things. They're all different ingredients, right? You can't make a chocolate cake with just flour and eggs, right? You need sugar and butter and milk and the chocolate and all the different stuff to actually make these things. It's really no different with cannabis. We need access to all of these compounds to really make awesome experiences for people on the recreational side, and more importantly, real medicine that's going to be highly efficacious so we can replace most of the crap that's in the marketplace today. And so what this really looks like I started talking about, is we have ways of isolating compounds. This is actually, it's a little bit hard to see, I apologize, but like this machine is one of our ones in-house. We can isolate up to 18 different compounds at the same time with this machine. But more importantly, a lot of the work that's happening right now by ourselves, some folks in Israel, etc., is really trying to figure out, like, what's the recipe? Like, how does this stuff work, right? Why does it work this way? And so this is, what we're actually doing, this is a really good example. We have a drug discovery lab, and so we're actually growing live human receptors in-house, like serotonin receptors and your different cannabinoid receptors, etc. And then we actually take the specific combinations of these cannabinoids and terpenes and can test and measure in real time the biological reaction of what happens when we introduce these to these receptor sites. Like, we're actually understanding how to solve for anxiety. We're actually understanding how to solve for, I'm getting attacked by flies up here, by the way, in case you're wondering what's going on. We're actually learning what it's going to take to really replace opioids. Right? We're actually learning all of this type of work right now. And later this year, we're getting into dopamine receptors and opioid receptors and all of these incredible things where we're finding that the cannabinoids from this plant and the terpenes from this plant have incredible binding effects at all of these really important receptors. We have an incredible opportunity to change the way that we consume medicine and the way that we think about medicine through the work that's happening right now. We also have a human studies team. We've done close to 50 double-blind studies at this point. We're actually testing these type of things here in Colorado, and we're about to move into real clinical trials internationally. But a ton of the actual real drug discovery work is actually happening here in Colorado right now. And when you put this all together, and we do like another double-blind study, for example, on the chill formulation, what's amazing about the chill formulation that we could put together, and there's lots of ways that we can make a really cool chill formulation now, is that the majority experience that people have is chill, right? It looks very different in terms of the chemical composition that you get directly from the plant, but it's the same compounds. We get them directly from the plant. It's just we can wipe out all of energy. We can focus mostly on chill. We can balance out a couple other really cool things and make a really awesome experience that we know that, more importantly, we can deliver consistently to everybody every single time, right? So it doesn't matter what store you walk in anymore. It doesn't matter when you walk in that store, you're gonna get that chill experience, which is going to be, from my perspective, what's really important for bringing mainstream into the cannabis marketplace. It's going to be what's really important for getting, not just all the people that currently support cannabis, but everyone else to understand this is a safe product, right? And we can deliver this in a safe way that you can consume with your family, right? And you know that you're going to be responsible, and this is going to be a safe, trusted type of experience, right? And that's the type of fun stuff that we're doing on that side of things. The other side I kind of hinted at really quick, and I'm going to run through this really quick for you just to give you some ideas of the other side of the house, which is we also have an incredible ability to really start reimagining the plant. I will say up front, because we're going to get into some things that probably in this, in different audiences can become touchy subjects. My parents actually started and led the GMO labeling campaign in the state of Colorado. I am wildly familiar with GMOs. I'm wildly familiar with what we were fighting and why we were fighting them. I was on a number of the national strategy calls. Like, there's certain things that we were very anti, right? Making a plant that's ready to accept toxins, or building the toxins directly into the plant, or all these type of things. Like, there's just lines we will never cross. But I came into this really big challenge a couple years ago, about 3 years ago. And that challenge was we started realizing we couldn't make any of the products that we wanted to make with just THC and CBD, right? These other compounds that come from the plant, the CBG, the CBC, the THCV, all of these other compounds, they're wildly important. And especially on the medicinal side, I mean, I make a statement to some people sometimes that they're always shocked by. I think CBC, one of the other cannabinoids, very, very rare cannabinoid, may become the most valuable compound coming from this plant. Right? And we know with that one, we could probably change the lives of, millions, if not hundreds of millions of people. How do you get CBC? Right? That becomes a challenging question, right? Because we know that we can do this, or we can really create some incredible products, but we have to be able to get CBC at commercial levels. And so we had to start trying to figure out this problem. I assumed someone else was doing it, and the only people I've been able to find who are really trying to solve these problems are people who are trying to do so through the creation of semi-synthetic compounds, right? So they're starting with yeast, they're creating these crazy enzyme processes, and they start producing these things. And besides the fact that I think if you can create a compound via, I'm still being attacked. If you can really create a product from the plant, why in the world would someone want it semi-synthetically, right? So, I was like, that's just probably not going to be the best way to produce these things. We then looked at crossbreeding. Can we crossbreed our way there? With some of these things, the answer is maybe. What we don't know is it going to be 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, 100 years to be able to get there. When you're dealing with like CBC, we're not sure if we can get there, right? There's a whole bunch of challenges for being able to actually make that type of thing happen. And so I ended up in a really weird place. Should I start looking at genetic solutions for being able to do this? And what was really interesting as we started exploring this, we realized we can completely change the way that we grow the plant today, right? Because we're now making consistency in the lab and we're building the formulations exactly the same way, we no longer are growing green crack and AK-47, right? Instead, we'll grow a plant that's just a CBG plant, or we'll grow just a CBC plant. We'll just grow the compounds that we need in the plant in a way that's non-transgenic, right? That we can just basically take this plant and do kind of a small, genetic edit to it, and be able to start producing high volumes of this plant in a very, very safe way for people. And so, we went down this and we started realizing there's probably two major projects that we could look at. The first one was the production of plants, or the creation of plants that will only produce these single compounds, right? And we'll talk a little bit about that more in a second. The second thing was this industry takes up a lot of energy, right? An incredible amount of energy is spent on this industry. And the big question was, what are we? Especially for mainstream products, are we really in the cannabis industry or are we in the cannabinoid industry? Right? And it's a very important question that a lot of people have to answer for themselves, because if you're really in the cannabinoid industry, which I think is what truly is going to be mainstream cannabinoid industry, right? Then really what we want to do is get this plant as efficient as possible, right? So in other words, with the same amount of energy, the same square footage, can we significantly increase the output of this plant, right? And we're going to talk about that for a couple seconds as well. And so what we started doing was, as far as we know, we're the only laboratory in the world that's doing this. We started using genetic editing, right, in the way that I could get behind and I thought was going to be super safe. And so we're actually using tools like CRISPR and an in-house genetic editing set that we built. And we're doing things today that, it's hard to see up there, but we're actually doing things that are called like particle blasting. And so imagine that this is a shotgun that just shoots gold pellets, right, at the plants, and we basically have loaded up the exact RNA cut that we're looking for with the Cas9 protein, which is then going to make the transformation and doesn't leave behind really any of the DNA or the DNA of any other plants or animals or viruses or bacteria the way that a lot of other people do it, right? And we're finding this to be a very effective, very safe approach for being able to do things. And once we actually do that, we move it into tissue culture, which is a little bit hard. We have these bioreactors and we're creating these calyces, and which it's hard to see up here. There's just clumps of these cells that we're basically growing that are the transformed cells. And from those we basically shoot stems. And so you can't really see it up here, but right there, the arrow is pointing to this magical blob up here. And that magical blob is actually just a miniature little plant that actually might be the first pure CBG plant in the world, right? A plant that just produces CBG, right? And all of that's kind of going through testing right now. And then once we do that, we can actually quickly get into what's called basically this production propagation using the same set of tools, so we can create genetically identical plants every single time that are going to be producing these type of compounds. And then we basically can immediately put that into greenhouses that look like this or out into fields. And this is actually down in Denver right here. We have 200,000 square feet set up, already starting to test the work in the genetics that we're doing. But to give you an idea, we've been approached by people in over 14 countries already today looking to basically put out fields of over 2,000 acres with our genetics because they understand how transformative that would be, right? Specifically, if we look at it, instead of having THC and just THC and CBD today, within the next really 12 to 18 months, we think we're going to complete the CBG plant, the CBC plant, THCV, CBDV, CBGV, and CBCV. Right? Then with all the different derivative breakdowns that we're going to be able to do from each one of those, we're going to go from a world that primarily focuses on about 2 cannabinoids to a world that's going to have about 12 to 14. That's going to probably be one of the most dramatic differences that we're ever going to see in this industry. So when we have access to this wide array of compounds, right? This has to get married up with the pharmacology so we understand how it works and how we create real medicine. But I think this is what's going to make such a transformational difference. The other thing we're doing, and this is going to be a little bit harder to tell too, was how do we solve that problem of how do we make this plant more efficient? And luckily we've been able to look at a couple other models for being able to do this. The 2 pictures up here is hard to see, apologize. The left-hand side is a plant where we haven't made any genetic edit. The right-hand side we've made a small 1 genetic edit. And what you're looking at on the right-hand side are fan leaves that are smothered in trichomes. Right? And we actually believe that we're actually going to be able to create plants here within the next 6 to 12 months that are no longer annuals. They basically will just be perennials, very safe way of doing it, where literally you just never put it into the flower cycle. The leaves start spitting out trichomes all the time. You lop off those leaves come back out every 2 to 3 weeks smothered in trichomes again, right? Low estimate, you'll be able to double your output by 2x, but we actually think we're going to be able to increase output by 10x, right? If we can increase output by 10x, you can imagine what that means in terms of the energy costs and everything else that's happening in this industry. Completely will transform things. And so what we're really looking at on the input side of things is that this will really is going to start turning into a global commodities market. And we think this is what's going to change, and what's really going to be important is the understanding of how do you use these commodities in ways that are going to create real medicine for people. And some of the challenges I think that are going to start happening that we haven't even started talking about with where this industry is going is how do we start getting approved what are going to be drugs for people? Because end of the day, it's going to be a really big question, who's paying for this, right? How are we going to get drugs approved with an FDA that only understands how to approve single compound drugs, right? I mean, if we really want to look at what's the biggest fight that we're going to have as an industry, it's probably going to be that one. Because I promise you I can make much better, safer, efficacious medicine using 3 to 5 compounds that come from this plant versus a single compound, right? But we have to figure out how in the world can we get that to the marketplace in a way that doctors are really going to be able to prescribe this here in this country. Other parts of the world, by the way, it's going to be a lot easier, right? Canada's going to be a lot easier. Germany's going to be a lot easier. Brazil's going to be a lot easier. The US is going to be a challenge, right? So those are type of things that we're looking at as we start looking at the marketplace 5 to 10 years from now and where things are going. Anyways, that's what I had just to give you a little bit of a taste of what we're doing and where the world's going.
So next up is Ari Sherman from evohemp, and he is going to talk about the present and future of hemp.
Hi, how's it going? My name is Ari Sherman, co-founder of evohemp. I'll give you a little brief background about myself and the business. We started evohemp in 2013. College roommate and myself really got interested in the industrial hemp industry from a friend of ours named Adam Dunn, who you may have known. Started a couple of companies, one called TH Seeds and another one called Hemp Hoodlum. So Adam moved to Colorado about 8 years ago, and really started getting hemp on my mind. Doing a little bit of research, and it was really just kind of got passionate about the environmental and economic benefits of industrial hemp farming. My mom, she's a nurse and a nutritionist, and she's the one that kind of pushed us towards the food side of things. I didn't really know anything about hemp seeds or their nutritional profile at all at the time. Thought it was kind of more of like a novelty or something. But I went home and kind of just Googled, nutritional benefits of hemp seeds. Really blown away. It is the most nutrient-dense food source on the planet. There's really nothing that compares to hemp seed as far as the nutritional content. About 33% of its weight is a complete protein. It does have all the essential amino acids in there. The other great thing is it's one of the best sources of omega-3 fatty acids. Pretty much the best land-based source of omega-3 fatty acids. So all that good stuff that's in fish oil, it's in a lot of plants, but really it's hard for the body to break down because of the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. The World Health Organization recommends a 4-to-1 ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 intake. And hemp seeds and chia seeds are some of the only plant sources that kind of fall into that category. Why are omegas important? Well, our brains are about 70% fat. And what happens as we age, that fat starts to degenerate and deteriorate over time, which can lead to dementia, Alzheimer's, and it can really be a preventable disease most of the time. It's usually based on environmental conditions, stress, and diet. So hemp seeds, just continuously supplementing enough hemp seeds throughout your life will ensure that your brain does have enough access to those omega-3 fatty acids. The other really, I would say even more important part of the hemp seeds nutritional profile is the protein source. It is the best plant-based source of protein out there. It is, like I said, about 33% of it is a complete protein, but it's unique protein in the fact that it has about 65% of those amino acids are what's called the globulin edestin. Globulin edestin is an amino acid that very similar resembles the protein found in your bloodstream, which is very unique to a plant source. So it's really the most digestible plant-based protein out there. That's a problem with a lot of plant-based proteins. They don't have the digestibility of an animal-based protein does. But hemp seeds, they have over a 98% bioavailability. And usually that's also because it's kept raw as well. So like a shelled hemp seed or a hemp heart is kept raw, so the enzymes are in there, makes it a lot more bioavailable. Essentially, it's a lot easier for your body to break down and utilize those nutrients with those enzymes in there. Hemp seeds have been used as a food source for thousands of years, starting in China around 8,000 to 10,000 years ago. Cannabis sativa was one of the first cultivated plants. The word sativa actually means cultivated plant. And cannabis, obviously, came, and there was a lot of other really great products like canvas, fabrics, and ropes. But the food, going back to the food, it's really unique. The protein protein itself, in the 1930s, there was a big outbreak of tuberculosis in Europe. It's an immune deficiency disease, and it spread really through young children. And what they learned is this globulin edison amino acid, by supplementing the diet throughout the day with this amino acid, it would provide enough of these antibodies to help fight off the disease. So they were literally treating tuberculosis with hemp over 100 years ago. And, about 3 times a day, they would supplement these children with kind of a paste of hemp mixed with oats. Essentially like a hemp milk extract blended with oats. 3 times a day, and within 6 months, these children went from coming in to being very skinny, very malnourished, and within 6 months of eating hemp seeds every day, were able to leave that facility healthier than they came in, and were going on to live happy and healthy lives, all because of the hemp seed. Throughout that really kind of sparked my initial interest in getting into industrial hemp, was really that kind of story, and really kind of, you see the photos, you can go online and see the photos of these children, very, very malnourished, and in 6 months of just eating hemp seeds, no pharmaceutical drugs, no severe treatments, they left, and lived happy, healthy lives. And then there's just so many other great benefits of the hemp plant. We're all here aware of the benefits of the flower and of the leaves, but I'm specifically here to talk about the seeds and the stalk. So I mentioned about the seeds, and then the stalk is kind of broken down into 2 parts. You essentially have the bast fibers, which are the inside, and then you have this shiv that's basically a hard outer fiber. One of the best parts about that outer fiber is it is such a renewable resource that is great for the building industry. They've been using hemp as building materials for thousands of years, but more recently it's kind of making a big comeback, mostly because of 2 things. The environmental conditions that we live in are incredibly toxic. They say that indoor pollution is sometimes 100 times the strength of outdoor air pollution. So the building materials that we have, from the concretes to the insulation to the paints, they're all slowly releasing toxic chemicals. And we're constantly breathing in these toxic chemicals. And we shouldn't be. They're leading to all kinds of chronic illnesses. It's really a simple process to create hempcrete. It's really 3 ingredients. All you do is you take the stalk, you break it apart, so it looks essentially like wood chips. You blend that stalk with water and lime. That forms like a nice concrete mix. They call it a hempcrete. Well, this hempcrete is super great at basically allowing air to pass in and out of the buildings. So you can have, in Europe, they have very large warehouses, larger than this, that use no HVAC. There's no heating, there's no air conditioning. It's 100% controlled due to the building materials. So at night, the building is able to release all of the heat because the temperature outside becomes cooler than inside, then the air exchanges, and vice versa. During the daytime, the buildings stay warmer because the heat outside passes in. So this is a really incredible building material from an economic and environmental standpoint, but also in particular for our personal health. There's a unique story. There's a couple of buildings in the United States that are made out of hemp, and there's some great folks here locally that are kind of really reviving that. But there's a unique story in North Carolina, a gentleman who has a daughter who has very severe autism. It's a very, very, very severe type of autism where the environmental conditions can really trigger this young girl's seizures. And what they realized was just by starting to eliminate things inside of her home, the seizures slowly started going away. And what they found out was it was the triggers from the chemicals and everything coming off of the building materials in her home that was actually causing these reactions. So after doing a lot of research, the family discovered that industrial hemp is actually the safest building material in the world. and by just building the home out of industrial hemp, reduced this little girl's seizures pretty dramatically. And so from there, now they're working on building basically a facility where other autistic kids can come and stay and get treatment. From the food side of things, to be able to treat children, to the building materials, there's so many applications. And then the other, really unique thing about the stalk in itself is that the inner part of the stalk, it's actually some of the strongest, if not the strongest, fibers in the world. That when twisted up properly, that's been shown to have a stronger strength than steel. Rumor has it Henry Ford years ago was developing these plant-based composites with things like flax and hemp, and because of the strength and the renewability of these items. What you can really do, though, for the fabric, which is really unique, is that it's incredibly antimicrobial. So it's one of the healthiest fabrics that we can put on our skin as well. So a lot of people, they're really concerned about the foods that they eat, and maybe they might even be concerned about the buildings that they're in, but very few of us are even considering about the clothing that we're wearing. Our skin is actually the largest organ in our entire body, and it is absorbing everything that we put on it. There's kind of this confusion and misunderstanding that if you consume something orally, it's different than when you put it on your skin. When in fact, the exact same chemicals, you might as well just take a piece of that shirt and swallow it because you're getting the exact same chemicals. So what can we do about that? Because now we have all of these mass-produced t-shirts and jeans, and they're using chemical dyes that essentially can cause allergic reactions, can cause skin conditions, allergies, but even more severe is they can transmit diseases and viruses. And when you go into a hospital, that can become very severe. About 90,000 people a year die in the United States due to staph infections. This is just an infection that you get from touching the curtain in the hospital, wearing the hospital gown, sitting on the hospital bed. 90,000 people a year die from something that is completely preventable. The majority of the fabrics in hospitals are cotton or polyester. Well, the problem with cotton and polyester is diseases and viruses can live on them for months and months and months at a time. Well, what they did is they started doing studies about testing different fabrics and the resilience against bacteria. And what they found was industrial hemp is far superior at resisting these bacteria. When they did a sample, they had a sample of cotton fabric and they had a sample of hemp fabric. And the hemp fabric had about a 60% resistance to the staph infection and the viruses, versus the cotton had about 98% of the bacteria still remained. So just very simple things about replacing cotton and polyester with industrial hemp can save 90,000 lives a year. And that's just one example. I know that's kind of exaggerating, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of other diseases that are transferred and transmitted through the fabrics, and the fibers throughout the worlds that we live in. So, I think I encourage everybody to just start incorporating a little bit more of hemp into their lives. From the hemp seeds to the fibers, and even the hemp plastics. We've all seen the videos of the plastics in the ocean. It's getting quite terrifying. I'm personally afraid of swimming around in the ocean nowadays from what I've seen. And really that can be prevented. A hemp-based composite can really replace all of those plastics that are out there. There are companies and people right now that are producing, hemp-based plastics, but it needs us to go out and buy them, to lower the cost of these goods, to really get it out to the mainstream. The t-shirts alone, you could save literally 2,000 liters of water per t-shirt. So we're all concerned about, in the showers, are you turning it off, or you're brushing your teeth, are you turning off the water? Well, how about just instead of buying that cotton t-shirt, you bought a hemp t-shirt and you just saved 2,000 liters of water. So, that's pretty much all I've got. The last thing is we've got further looking, there's so many applications to hemp, people can kind of get lost. So I tried to focus on, the ones that are currently being used every day, the food and the fiber materials. But forward looking, we have things like batteries. There's researchers working on creating hemp graphene that essentially is replacing lithium. Lithium is one of the most damaging industries that we have, and we're becoming more and more reliant on lithium for our batteries and our phones and our cars. Well, essentially, those are going to end up in landfills, and we have to mine them in these pools of sulfur when we could just be using a renewable resource like industrial hemp. They essentially just burn up the hemp into little tiny particles, layer them on top of each other into these graphene-like sheets, and they can be a supercapacitor and to store energy. But to get to that point where we're producing batteries and we're running our cars and fueling our homes, we got to start with the t-shirts. We got to start with the foods and the protein powder and the seed oil and the supplements. So I encourage everybody, next time they're at a store and they have an option to choose the hemp one or the alternative, I recommend everyone try the hemp one. Thank you.
All right, up next is Courtney, Mathis, and Perez from KindColorado. They're going to talk about social responsibility, and then when they're done, we're going to do a real quick raffle from NoCo Hemp, and then we'll move on to Amber Bacca from Trax Team Solutions.
Thank you all for having us. Kelly Perez, KindColorado, co-founder, CEO.
Courtney Mathis, co-founder, KindColorado, and president.
What we find so inspiring about the folks that talked before us is this is what we're talking about. How all the ways that cannabis can do good. We started our work doing community engagement, trying to figure out how communities could really benefit from the legal cannabis sector. I'm a policy person, a health equity person, and we really didn't see local communities benefiting. We've had to pivot and think about our business a little bit differently. When we're purpose-driven with the tool to make a difference in community, that was our business. Well, we also have to get customers, right? We also have to talk to cannabis businesses and ancillary businesses, hemp businesses, about why this matters and how what matters to them can show up in community. You saw very clearly what matters to John, why he got into it. You saw very clearly what matters to Ari and why he got into it to save the planet. But we have this enormous uphill battle, and a lot of that battle is public perception, and a lot of that battle is actually policy. So currently, today, the ballot's not out yet, but in Denver, there's about 10 to 15% additional taxes on retail that's proposed on the ballot. It hasn't all been pulled together. And cannabis folks had something to say about, I think, 2 of those measures. We're not typically invited to the table, right? We're not typically thought of as legitimate, civically minded, regular folk who have a lot to contribute to community. If we want to be invited to those tables, we actually have to show up, and we have to say what matters to us. We have to demonstrate it in community, and we have to be purpose-driven. So if that's not frightening enough, Courtney said I'm not allowed to talk inspiring, which is what I typically like to do. I got to scare the pants off of people. Really? Closer to the mic? It sounds so loud. A ring. Okay. So I'm doing the insurance policy. We do this so we can lead on it, so that we don't have to respond constantly to the things that come to us. Cannabis, you're vulnerable, so here's this tax that you need to pay, and this tax, and this tax, and this tax. If we would like to have a seat at that table and have part of deciding what matters to a community and change hearts and minds around that we're all dirty drug dealers with nothing to offer, we have to show up and do that. So here's some data to back up those inspiring words.
I'm a little bit shorter.
A little bit shorter.
Okay, so what we were talking about is cannabis doing good. It's the hashtag that we use for everything. And now I'm going to be super cheesy and tell you about data doing good. So just to compel you a little bit more about why this industry, this sector, and this business should do good, that's license holder, ancillary, anyone touching the industry. If what Kelly said doesn't scare you, this should certainly compel you. And that is that 30% of, companies that are purpose-driven experience 30% more innovation. Companies that are purpose-driven experience 40% reduction in employee turnover. They also experience 10% more growth than companies who are not purpose-driven over 3 years. 90% of consumers will choose a purpose-driven brand over a not purpose-driven brand when quality and price are the same. And because we're in cannabis and it's heavily dominated by millennials. 79% of millennials will choose a purpose-driven company and be loyal to that company even if employee wages are lower. So this is magnificent data. It's not just data that we made up. It doesn't just come from the cannabis sector. This data comes from Cone Communications and the Harvard Business Review, and it's across all sectors. And we would be remiss to think that the cannabis sector is going to be exempt from these trends.
So what are some practical examples of what does it mean for cannabis to do good?
Well, I don't know, Kelly. Why don't you tell us?
Oh, should I? Okay. For example, we have cannabis businesses that have fought for licenses in local communities, who followed all applicable laws, but frankly were not going to open because the community members that were their neighbors said no way. So it was not hard for us to bring folks to a table and let the cannabis business owner talk about who they are, what they care about, what they plan to bring to the community. That changed folks' mind really, really quickly. That business is operating, open, the $5 million spent to renovate the building was well spent. It doesn't sound so difficult, but that also provides an opportunity for that cannabis business owner to engage with community members that were for them and community members that were against them. We have cannabis business owners who are spending upwards of $100,000 in the community around homelessness prevention, domestic violence prevention, veterans, hunger. Hunger is a huge issue. So when you figure out you're in this sector because you have passion, we just talked to some folks who were super driven to bring what they do and make it accessible to all of us. But is what you care about what the community cares about? Figuring out that alignment and showing up that way so that you can say, I am part of this community, this is what I want to bring to you, and this is the way that I show it. So at this time, there are community engagement regulations in Denver. Colorado's first, not necessarily best. The policymakers writing this stuff, they don't know what they're doing, and I'm not being dismissive. I was a policymaker who worked in the space. We are figuring it out. So good people who care about things have to show up from our sector and say, even though this recreation center necessarily doesn't seem like it's right up the alley of producing my amazing product, I'm at the table so that I contribute for the youth of the community. It exceeds the regulatory requirements. It's part of a merit-based application in other markets. It is the way you will get a new license renewal. And frankly, it changes hearts and minds because of all of the data points that you spoke of. So if I wanted to get started, what would I do?
Well, I guess I'll tell you.
Please.
Okay, so before we get started, I want to sort of frame out what we're talking about, and that is cannabis social responsibility, and that's what KindColorado does. It's our special twist on corporate social responsibility with cannabis's culture, history, and pain points in mind. And when we talk about cannabis social responsibility, you can execute social responsibility in a lot of different ways. You can do it economically, environmentally, politically, and socially. And just starting small in one of those pathways on one of those platforms will make the most ginormous difference you could possibly imagine, not only for your business, but for the entire sector. And so we talk about it very nebulously, but let's talk a little bit how to get started. So the first thing when you're putting together your CSR, your Cannabis Social Responsibility Plan, is to first define your business goals. Why are you doing CSR? What outcomes do you hope that your business will achieve? What outcomes do you hope that your business will achieve in its community, among its employees, and for its bottom line? Secondly, define what it is that you care about, what legacy you want to leave behind, and the inspiring impact that you want to make in communities. Get really clear on that. That is not just your brand mission, the one you have today. It's not the tagline on your packaging. It's not the color scheme for your packaging. It's not the sign on the front of your building. These are intrinsic values of what you care about. And we're not just talking about within the cannabis industry. If you're touching the industry, you're always championing the cannabis cause, which is changing hearts and minds, pushing legalization, and creating access. When we talk about understanding what it is that you care about, it's sort of saying that's a given. But what do you care about outside of the cannabis cause? Do you care about homelessness? Do you care about political advocacy? Do you care about sustainability? And get really clear on what that is. The third component is to do some community mapping. So who in cannabis, who in the community can actually align with your values. So if you define homelessness or food insecurity, find out who in your community is addressing those issues, who's doing it well, and will they work with cannabis? I gotta tell you, we spend thousands of hours a year just brokering relationships between nonprofits and cannabis. It's not why we got into this work, and it's not really the work that we want to be doing even next year. But it's really necessary because the nonprofit sector and communities at large are kind of afraid, which means they won't work with you, which means you gotta have us. And again, it's not how we want to be spending our time, but it just is. And so understand what it is that you care about, who in the community is addressing that need, are they doing it well, and are they friendly to cannabis? Those are the top three. I'll let you start with the fourth.
And I can't have a cannabis talk without saying anything about the war on drugs in the historical context that we find ourselves. Just can't. Because until youth aren't being arrested 8 to 10 times, black and brown youth, 8 to 10 times the rate of white youth still being arrested in Denver where it's legal, we know that this is, crushing people all over the country and world. It's still a death sentence lots of places. So we have a lot of fun in Colorado, but this is really serious work. And we have a pretty big responsibility with the context that we find ourselves to move this forward. And the pain points, the hard parts about it, are exactly also our opportunities to really do that. So it sounds light and fluffy and inspiring, but it's actually quite deep. So as Courtney said, the finding out what matters in the community and who's working on it, if you came to a community and you weren't a member of it, you probably don't know. So you have to find out what's happening here and can I be allied? And recognize that some folks are going to say, maybe not, maybe later. But remember what your business goals are. Be patient. Remember that you are maybe folks' first example of someone working in the sector. You represent the entire sector, folks, the OGs who've been working on this forever, to the future of the science and the access to hemp products, which I hope are everywhere. So we really do have quite a large responsibility. And it's not okay for it to be a solely white sector. Like, this was paved on the backs of black and brown people. So part of your cannabis social responsibility could be around hiring from the zip code that you're in and thinking about workforce development, hiring people that have maybe spent some time on the street or are coming out of a shelter who need some economic opportunities. Really being thoughtful that since I'm vulnerable, and certainly other folks are vulnerable, how can we work together to really show what it is that we have to bring, which are gifts. So you went through 1, 2, 3, 4.
Investments.
What's your investment budget? It is not always money, right? It's time, it's talent, it's treasure. It could be sitting at that table talking about the recreational opportunities in the community and you really pushing as a representative of the business community saying what the youth need here. Public safety is not what we need. We need youth recreation. We need opportunity. We need workforce, education, and pathways for sustainability for everyone. 5.
Well, I just wanted to say, going back to the investment budget, get really creative.
Right.
People oftentimes assume that social responsibility is a function of excess capital.
When I make it, then I'll do it.
That's completely wrong. And as we have lots of really good examples of tremendous impact that cannabis is making in community that has nothing to do with excess dollars and everything to do with already existing expertise and manpower and time and talent. I'll give you one small example. We work with an organization has multiple dispensaries by the name of Lightshade, and they have partnered with a community for every single retail operation that they have. One of their stores is partnered with Grant Street Reach, which is a food shelter that serves 1,100 folks experiencing hunger or homelessness every Monday. Does that organization need hundreds of thousands of dollars? Sure. But when you sit down with them and have a conversation with them, their most immediate need was that their volunteer coordinator, because it's a completely volunteer-run agency, was spending an entire day unpaid, off work, to drive to Food Bank of the Rockies to pick up food donations to bring back and forth in his tiny sedan to that shelter. Well, Lightshade said, you know what? We have a box truck. We could send that box truck and go pick up those food donations, and you don't have to take the day off, and we can do it in one hit, and it's done. This immediate relief to that organization was pioneering to them. And they would have never known that they could fit in and do that and fill that need without just having a conversation with them. Does it cost a little bit of money to pay the box driver? Sure. But it wasn't due to excess capital. It was due to really creative thinking. So whatever box or idea you have around community engagement, throw it away, step on it, recycle it, get rid of it.
Time, talent, treasure. What do you have to give? What do you have to bring? And be super creative about what that is. We found amazingly out-of-the-box thinkers in this space. We don't even pretend to know what all the ideas are. I have to mention one other. We've helped Sweetgrass Kitchens co-brand a high CBD product, a double chocolate chip cookie, I think. That 5% of the funds go to fund Planned Parenthood of the Rocky Mountains. Yeah, hello. That was state dollars. That was from an anonymous funder that was, helping control teen pregnancy. That money's gone. What a story if cannabis were to replace those dollars. That's pretty significant. Time, talent, treasure, your investment budget. You know what matters to the community. You know what matters to you. You come up with creative ideas to do it. You give thoughts about what your metrics are because you had business goals. So my business goal was my incredible employee turnover at 61%. What the hell do I do? Well, we found from other sectors that what matters is folks being connected to each other, folks being connected to the community, folks seeing that you are a purpose-driven company and wanting to be a part of something bigger. That's millennial talk. That's what they care about. Those are the companies that they want to be a part of. So maybe that's what you want to do. Then figure out how you communicate your story. And we have so many companies that we're working with that have no idea how to talk about the amazing things that they're doing. And it's not to sell the product. It's like to sell the ethos of the potential of what we could do. It's to open folks' minds and give you an opportunity to show up in community. Then what do I do after I do all those things? Communicate, communicate, communicate.
Yes, for the love of Pete, talk about it. There are so many people in this sector who are talking about or doing small amounts of good, and they say very modestly and humbly, well, I don't really want to brag, or that's not why I'm doing it. And I say, yeah, hogwash. You need to talk about it.
Language.
I'm sorry. But you need to talk about it. Social media, PR, website, these platforms, talk about the good that you're doing, if not for the benefit of your own company, but to inspire and raise the bar a little bit higher for everyone else in this sector. Take your humility, put it in your pocket, and save it for Thanksgiving when you're in front of your family, because we don't need it in this sector. So talk about it, talk about it, talk about it.
And then rinse and repeat, because these things aren't perfect. The relationships are new. You're going to make mistakes. It's okay. You go in with good intention, but you think about good intention actually isn't enough. Impact matters. So know what you're looking for and then measure it. If you're saving 200 liters of water because you're buying a hemp shirt instead of we want to know about it. We want to talk about it huge. If you are isolating cannabinoids and saving people's lives, we get to talk about that stuff because it's world-changing, it's life-changing. So we think that cannabis has an enormous opportunity to take its pain points and really do some fabulous good, and we'd inspire you to do that, but don't forget, these things will be done for us if we don't decide how to lead on them. A 65 to 75% tax rate is pretty incredible. I just mentioned 10 to 15% just in Denver alone, and we are old in the market. What do you think is happening in other places where this kind of work it's in policy, but we could actually create what it is and have it be something that we love, something that's fun, and something that's really making a difference in the world.
Yeah, good job.
Hard-hitting. That wasn't inspiring, right? It was scary. Okay. Thank you.
So one of the reasons that I'm so excited about all of our speakers is Yellowstone is 18 years old. We're an independent media. I've been in media my whole life. I love it. I love the art and science of communications. And I truly believe in the role and responsibility of media. Yellowstone has very, very strict journalism standards. We never do pay-to-play. We don't sell out. I have some amazing writers that cover really relevant topics. So for me to have a conversation like this around cannabis, which can be world-changing, not just because it's money, not just because it's fun, but because there's all these other great impacts. For me, I felt like all of these amazing people just spoke for me the things I wish I could say. Say a little bit about the Lone Hawk Farm. It's a 150-year-old family farm. They've had it the whole time, and it's still a working farm. I have flies at my house, so there's still flies at the farm too. So I'm glad everybody is dealing with the flies. Amber, come on up. She's going to talk to us about the recreational side, the fun stuff.
Oh, good evening. How is everyone? My name is not Kelly Perez, as stated in the program, although I wish it were, because what you're involved with is awfully exciting. Very inspirational. So my name is Amber Bacca. I am the CVO and founder of Trax Team Solutions, and I'm also the lead facilitator for cannabis trainers. Just a little bit about myself. I have been consuming cannabis for 25 years now, long before the legal markets. And I started out in the industry as a trimmer, then I was a courier for a period of time, became a bud tender and store manager for a busy dispensary in Denver that was medical only at that point. And then I was the general manager for a chain of dispensaries in Denver for 4.5 years. And I've been a trainer and a consultant for about the past 3.5 years at this point. So I've worn a lot of different hats when it comes to cannabis, and so I have a lot of different experiences, and I've had a lot of really different interactions with different types of individuals throughout the years. And what Trax Team Solutions does is we are aiming to provide innovative solutions for compliance and operations for the cannabis industry. We're really passionate about building resilience into cannabis businesses, and it really does connect with a lot of these other things that everyone has already spoken about this evening. It's all very connected, and I'm very passionate about moving the industry forward. But what I also do on the side is I'm the lead facilitator for cannabis trainers. And we teach, primarily, responsible vendor classes. So I teach classes in front of rooms full of bud tenders and managers and owners, from all over Colorado and in other states, and we've even had some remote learners from Canada as well. And so I directly interface with bud tenders, and they are on the front lines. They are literally the last opportunity to provide information to our consumers, and it's incredibly important. I'm going to give you just a couple of examples why. So at one point, I was in Fruita, camping and working, and I ended up working in the Colorado Welcome Center for about 3 or 4 days because they had internet. And I would overhear all these really interesting conversations because that's the gateway on I-70 into Colorado from Utah. So you have all kinds of individuals coming into the state. A lot of them are coming to visit because of cannabis. And, I was just sitting there working for 3 days straight, and I would just hear these really strange conversations, one of which was between two older women. And, one of them said, "Oh, have you tried the cannabis yet?" And the other one said, No, I haven't tried it. And the other one says, "I have tried it, and it's just not for me. It didn't work right. It's not for me." And I was just sitting there the whole time. I didn't want to become involved in any way, but I was like, wow, how disappointing, because I'm pretty sure you just haven't received the proper information to find something that actually works for you. The power of the plant wasn't fully explained to you, and so that made me kind of sad. Another example, does anybody here know who Maureen Dowd is and how she's connected to the cannabis industry? Yeah, can anybody tell us a little bit about what happened in 2014? Yeah. Yeah. She ate the entire candy bar. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what it was. Well, although at that point, we had converted a lot of medical product over to adult use, and it wasn't limited at 100 milligrams at that point. So it could have very well been a lot more than that. The point is she came to Colorado, she bought a candy bar as a journalist. I might have sold it to her, I'm really not sure. I was working that day. And she ate the entire thing, went back to her hotel room, and she thought she was dying. And she wrote a scathing article about the industry and about how awful cannabis is and how awful and irresponsible our industry is. And it really set a negative tone right at a time when most of us were celebrating about going recreational in Colorado and looking forward to all of this opportunity to share the plant with people and to move the industry forward. And these are some of the things that can happen if consumers are not aware of the reality of the plant and how to properly use it. So I think a big issue within, the industry, and John touched on this, is just inconsistency. We're dealing with a plant. A plant is a living thing, right? We can't, there are certain things we can do to breed consistency into a plant, but it's Mother Nature. She's pretty much going to figure out some way to screw it up in her mind at some point. So inconsistency is not a problem for a lot of us, but for individuals who are looking for consistency, it can be tricky. In addition to that, we are working on testing in Colorado specifically and trying to make that better, but I think there's a lot of misinformation out there currently, specifically regarding high potency products. I hear from bud tenders or individuals on the front lines all the time about how many people come into the shops and they go, I just want the highest THC, whatever, I don't care what it is. It could be disgusting, it might not even work, I just want high THC. And it's really frustrating for those of us in the industry who might be a little bit more knowledgeable about this, because we're starting to understand there is a range of cannabinoids that are going to have different effects on different individuals depending on their body types, their tolerance, their experience, how much they've slept, what they've eaten, whether or not they've consumed alcohol, if they're sad, if they're happy. All of these factors play into your experience with cannabis. And so not only is the plant itself a little bit inconsistent on the one hand, our bodies are inconsistent on the other hand, so it can be very difficult to find the meeting point between them. And when you couple that with misinformation about, okay, higher potency is going to get me higher, that's when the conversation kind of falls apart and people aren't meeting their needs. For example, me personally, I do not prefer high potency THC products. I don't feel comfortable, I get anxious in it. I actually don't even feel that intoxicated from it. I prefer a different range of cannabinoids that's more appropriate for my personal receptors. So education is very, very important. And having said that, I'm not going to get super scientific this evening. I'm just going to break it down with some of the basic product types and what you can kind of expect in a general sense. We have to also be very careful as frontline industry workers to never provide medical advice. This is a huge deal at this point. There was an MED, Marijuana Enforcement Division memo, just a couple months ago. There was some sort of sting that occurred, or an investigative journalist had called, I think, 70 different dispensaries around Colorado, posing as a pregnant woman and asking for advice on how to use cannabis as a pregnant woman. And somewhere around 60% of the individuals who picked up the phone actually provided medical advice over the phone to a pregnant woman who they couldn't verify who it was, had no medical records, and the state caught wind of that, and they're like, oh no, this is not happening. So, now we have that on our plates as well, and we certainly, within our cannabis trainers courses, we try to guide our bud tenders on how to speak properly about cannabis without providing medical advice. So, again, this is why I'm going to make things very basic in this circumstance. So let's start talking about flower in particular. For many, many years, we've been looking at flower or bud in three main categories: indica, sativa, and hybrid, which would be in the middle. Over the years, a lot of our genetics have been watered down depending on how well they've been protected by certain growers. And what we've also found, and so what we've been saying for many years is sativa is more energizing, more uplifting, you're gonna feel it more in your head, and that's going to be the effect. And then indica, we call it Indicouch, right? It helps relax you, it might help you sleep, and it's going to have a more calming effect and more of a body effect as well. And then hybrids are somewhere in the middle. And so for many, many years, we've actually been discussing flower, cannabis itself in these terms. What we're starting to find is there are a number of people, a good percentage of people, about 30% is what I'm gathering, John, please tell me if I'm wrong, who actually have the opposite experience with it. Are you one of them? Raise your hand if you're one of these people. Okay, not 30% of everybody here, but I guarantee you know somebody who does have an opposite effect. And so now we have to flip that entire conversation as well. For most people, sativas tend to be more uplifting and energizing. For most people, indicas are more relaxing, but that might not be the case for you in any regard. You have to figure out what works for you and for your body chemistry. So that's typically where the conversation begins when it comes to flower. And flower is what ends up in our edibles, it ends up in our concentrates, so that's really the core of the conversation to start with. So then we start talking about methods of consumption. And there's so many different methods and different products out there right now, I can't even keep track of them, I'm not going to lie. But typically we have smoking and vaping flower, and they have different effects, and you can use a different amount of product throughout those. But basically, the difficulty comes in, recommending how much to use sometimes. That's where bud tenders, I think, fail. And I think what happens is they always forget how much they know. We all actually know a lot more than we think we do, and we forget what it was like 10, 20 years ago before we started using regularly. And so we really try to break it down to the basics. So, if you are going to try flower for the first time, how much should you try? Well, I typically get the response from the bud tenders, a little bit. I'm like, okay, well, what does that mean? What does that mean to you? What does that mean to you? This is all relative, so this can be completely different. So really, you have to start factoring in time. So it's really beneficial to just take your time with cannabis. You can always consume more, but once you've overindulged or overconsumed a little bit, it might make you pretty uncomfortable, and it might take a little while for those effects to subside. So it's always better to take your time, especially if you're inexperienced with a particular product type. And so we recommend that you have maybe 1 to 3 hits or inhalations, and then you wait and see how that goes, and then perhaps after about 10 or 20 minutes, then you can consume a little bit more and see how much more is effective for you. With flower, it does tend to kick in a little bit quicker than some of the other product types, and it also doesn't last as long, so it can be a lot more comfortable for our new users. And aside from topicals, which are very easy to get into because they're not typically psychoactive, we do recommend flower for initial users. And what's also important, and I think is commonly missing from the conversation about all of our cannabis products, is how to read the label. There are those of us who are really strict on what we consume in terms of food, but we're not necessarily as strict when it comes to cannabis. I'm not quite sure why that is. But I think there's a lot we can do to educate our consumers on how to read the label. In Colorado specifically, we have a number of required warning statements, but we're also required to list the potency. We're also required to list what was applied to the plant. Anything that was inorganic, we're required to list that. And I'm finding that consumers are unaware of that. I mean, we're inundated with information all the time. So when you throw more printed information in front of somebody's face, they probably won't read it at the end of the day. So I think it's important to have that conversation with individuals, especially if you have more of a sensitive body type like I do, about how to read the label and to be able to identify what was applied to that plant as it was being grown. What are you actually consuming at the end of the day? I mean, all of our growers are supposed to flush their plants properly, but that's not on the label. We don't know how much flushing is occurring, so it's important to know what's on the label. So let's move on to concentrates, and I will say that, I work with businesses in different states outside of Colorado. This has just been my focus for many years. And we're very lucky in Colorado because we are still able to manufacture and sell concentrates and edibles. These are product types that a lot of different states are actually very afraid of because they've heard so many horror stories from consumers in Colorado, specifically from Colorado. It's actually pretty sad. So I'm pretty passionate about making sure that consumers are educated on these product types specifically, because if we want to be able to continue to manufacture and sell them, we have to make sure that we are telling people what to expect so they don't overconsume or overindulge. So with concentrates, and honestly, John could speak to this way better than I can because I don't really typically use concentrates, but I mean, there's butter, there's bubble hash, there's solventless. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. What are some of the newer things coming out on the market, John? Can you tell us? Okay. Okay, gotcha. Well, I always ask my room full of participants in my classes, what is on the shelves these days? And they tell me all sorts of crazy things, and I'm like, oh, that's exciting, and I have no idea what that is. So, anywho, there are lots of different types of concentrates, but concentrates, I mean, that's the name, it's in the name, right? It's basically flower and cannabinoids concentrated, and what goes along with that is everything that was applied to the plant is concentrated as well, and that's what consumers are consuming. So it's even more important, I think, to educate our consumers on how to read the label. It also, as a regulation in Colorado, we are required to list everything inorganic that was applied to the plant that was used to produce the concentrate. So when you pick up that edibles packet, or excuse me, that concentrates package, that information is on the label. It's available to you. You just have to take a moment to read through it. So anywho, concentrates can be consumed in a variety of different ways. I keep hearing of new things all the time. Heard about a ceramic rock that you now put in your pipe or something like that, and you keep it warm. There's titanium nails, there's glass nails, there's vaporizers still for concentrates. So lots of different consumption possibilities there. But I think what it really comes down to, the sticky area when it comes to concentrates, is, again, how much to consume. I think a lot of our cannabis tourists, especially who come in from other states, they're watching YouTube, getting ready for their trip, and getting super excited about what they're going to see here in Colorado, and that's great, right? But they're also watching potentially videos of individuals taking 5-gram dabs, or just incredible, insane amounts of consumption that. I think it's crazy. I'm highly impressed with that. I could never do that. But that's just not the reality for your first-time user. As excited as you are, that's probably not what you want to consume. So the conversation with concentrates, specifically with our bud tenders, really centers around how much to consume. And so again, with my bud tenders, I say, okay, well, what do you tell them? And they say, I tell them to do a little bit. A little dab will do you. That's what we tell them. Okay, well, what is that? So my first dabbing experience, again, I don't use concentrates very often, but I was actually hosting an employee party, and Johnny wanted to give his boss, me, a dab. And I said, Johnny, I just want a little dab. And he said, okay, Amber, I'll hook you up. Oh, it was not a little dab. It was quite large, and I ended up, I couldn't talk. I couldn't hold anything in my hands. Food was falling out of my mouth. It was very embarrassing, as the boss especially. And so, I tell that horror story to my bud tenders, and like, oh yeah, you're right. If people don't know, they don't know. So really, typically, we recommend like a half of grain of rice, or I also tell bud tenders to actually sit there and draw it on the counter at the point of sale, the size of a pen head, like the tip of a pen, or a half a grain of rice, whatever it's going to be. Just be very, very accurate about it, and make sure you're communicating that effectively. Concentrates typically kick in definitely a lot quicker than the other product types, and they might last a little bit longer than flower, although not as long as edibles. So I do have quite a bit to talk about when it comes to edibles, so I want to jump into that here. So edibles they're the most easily, for a lot of people, they're very comfortable with the fact that it's in food form, or they can't taste the cannabis in it. So it's a little bit easier for them to be comfortable consuming it. But that can also get us in trouble, right? Because a lot of our edibles are so good these days, you can't taste the cannabis. And the edibles themselves are so tasty that you have to stop yourself from eating more once you're intoxicated. So, and another sticky area we encounter when it comes to edibles is a lot of people who have been consuming or who have been smoking cannabis for a very long time, potentially for decades, they think that they can eat as many edibles as they want. Oh, I've been using cannabis for 25 years. I should be able to eat 500 milligrams of edibles. Well, that is not the case. And that kind of mentality could get you into some very big trouble. What we're starting to understand is different people, they have different types of digestive systems, and some people have more of, what I'm hearing is more of a particular enzyme that helps to make edibles themselves more potent or less depending on the individual. So like I have a buddy that we hang out with, and his name is Jason. He hates that I tell this story, but I do it anyway. And, he'll come over to the house and we'll have a barbecue and he'll say, hey, give me some of those edibles, Amber. And I'll give him like 3 milligrams. And that's it, I promise. And he will hallucinate for 4 hours. And he can't talk. And he's sitting there just out of his mind. And I feel so bad. It's very uncomfortable for me. He's obviously uncomfortable. He keeps trying it. And he's not a tiny person. He's really susceptible to cannabis, and his tolerance is super low. And so, I'm actually not any bigger than him, and my happy place is 15 to 20 milligrams. I've been consuming cannabis for 25 years, but you give me 30 milligrams, and I definitely have issues. Like, I feel anxious, and I feel like I need medical attention. So we need to keep that in mind, and what we're starting to understand is delta-9 THC, which is the cannabinoid that helps you feel high when you smoke cannabis. It actually converts into 11-hydroxy when you're eating and consuming edibles. So that's why it's actually a different feeling. It's a different cannabinoid. It's going to have a different effect on different people. So really, when it comes to edibles, we do recommend definitely start low, go slow. The state standard size dosage for edibles is 10 milligrams currently, but as I just explained to you, less than 10 might be appropriate for a lot of individuals. So we actually recommend that people start with somewhere between 3 and 5 milligrams. And edibles do take longer to kick in. So the warning label used to say may take 2 hours or longer. That just changed in January because people were over-consuming. So now we say it may take up to 4 hours or 4 hours or longer. And it's really important to remember that, because if you ingest more before you've actually felt the full effects of the edible, you could end up in a very uncomfortable position where you've over-consumed or overindulged. And again, with the edibles, what is going into the edibles is very important. Different people have different sensitivities. So like for me, I can't consume anything that has butane in it, any butane hash at all, even if it's within an edible, because it makes me feel sick. And so I only know that because I've consumed enough cannabis over the years and I've paid attention to it. But for your new user, they don't understand all of that, right? They're not super educated on that. So it's important that we guide our consumers on how to read the label. What was applied to the plant? What type of concentrate is it? Are there any ingredients included in the edible that might cause an allergic reaction? And then definitely just start low, go slow. And with all of these product types, I've always recommended that we encourage individuals to actually keep a journal, because let's face it, sometimes you're too high to remember how you felt. So it's important to actually write it down, and then you can reference it later, and then you can start to really hone in on what works for you and what works for your body type and your particular cannabinoid receptors. So I think that's about all I have for this evening. Again, very basic information, but thank you very much.
We've got Ashley Weber from Colorado NORML coming up. She's going to be speaking on the latest legislation that's going to be taking place in Colorado this year, and I guess there's quite a lot of it. Before Ashley comes up, I do want to thank Boulder Digital Arts for filming this. Boulder Digital Arts has classes that you can take in all kinds of media, from web development to video to graphic design. It's all kinds of different classes, and it's independent classes, so it's not having to roll in school.
Cannabis/marijuana should be legal. But Colorado, of course, is a leader in terms of legalization, in terms of how to live in a regulatory framework, and of course, how to create jobs, well-paying jobs and business opportunities for people. But what is important to remember is this is all primarily about the patients who need it for medicine, the people who use it, quote-unquote, recreationally, people who use it for other purposes, and of course, the hemp plant in terms of fiber and food and fuel and other things that will do a lot to remove us from the, what I call drug addict and pusher relationship with the fossil fuel industry. But how did we get here? First off, we got to legalization because we voted it in. We, the people who voted in 2012, voted to get Amendment 64. First, we were, as volunteer circulators and paid circulators, we got it on the ballot through the initiative process, and then we stepped up and we voted. And that's how it's been done through the initiative process, and Vermont was the first state to do it strictly through the legislative process. But how did the legislators get to where they were able to vote for it? They had people elect them in. That's why it's so important, A, register to vote. And there's an easy way to do it. You can go online, you got your magic phones, govotecolorado.com. Pay attention to what they're doing on the state and local levels and the national level as well. And of course, don't forget to vote. Ballots drop in mid-October, and November 6th is the official election day. Politics is survival, and we want to survive as humans. We want the cannabis plant and the hemp plant to be available for future generations. And the way we survive as an industry and as human beings is we make our voices known at the ballot box, and we keep notifying our legislators from the local, the state, the national, what's important to us. Now, Ashley was kind enough to share with me some various bills that are coming up on the national level, so I encourage you to contact your congresspeople because there's some very important things that are going on. For example, we have the Marijuana Justice Act sponsored by Senator Cory Booker from New Jersey and Representative Barbara Lee from California. And this is comprehensive legislation. The idea of removing cannabis or marijuana from the schedule, cannabis is now a Schedule I substance, like same with heroin and things that are claimed to have no medicinal value. And of course, we know that's bullhacky. You know, many people that we know, and many of us personally, have benefited from having cannabis as a medicine. And this bill, if it were to pass, would remove the Controlled Substance Act and to also incentivize states to mitigate existing and ongoing disparities in state-level cannabis/marijuana arrests. And the good news is that this has been introduced in both houses. Now, we need to get on our senators and representatives who actually support this. And keep in mind, a lot of the policies that we advocate for revolve around social justice issues. We know the drug war has disproportionately affected people of color, and part of our policy choices is in fact to bring people of all races and all ethnicities into the community and have people of all races and ethnicities being able to be a part of the business community, be able to make a living with their skills in the cannabis industry. That's very important, and we cannot forget that. Another bill, Senator Schumer, who's the minority leader, Marijuana Freedom and Opportunity Act, to remove marijuana from controlled substance and to provide funding for the expungement of criminal records with those with past marijuana convictions. That's important, and that's something we need to work on the state level as well. People should be able to go back and make a living even if they've broken the law, and chances are if it's a law regarding the substances, it's probably an unjust law enforced in an unjust way. So that's something that we need to definitely be supporting. Another ending Federal Marijuana Prohibition Act, Representatives Tom Garrett, who I think is from Virginia, and Tulsi Gabbard have introduced bipartisan legislation, eliminate federal criminal penalties for possession and cultivating marijuana, and give states the power and flexibility to establish their own marijuana policies free from federal interference. Another one, the STATES Act. Senators Warren and Gardner have introduced bipartisan legislation to remove the threat of federal intervention and prosecution in states that regulate marijuana use and sales. This is a bipartisan thing, and you know, sometimes bipartisanship means we'll find a way for both parties to screw us over, but sometimes bipartisanship is good. This is one of those instances. So I think what we need to look at also is what's going on at the state level as well. We are fortunate in a lot of ways, but there are still some things that need to be rethought and retooled, and sometimes even outright overhauled. I'll give you an example. It's the Coates decision. Some of you have heard about the decision. Coates was a guy who was a cannabis patient he would use in his off hours, and yet he was working for Dish Network, and they did a drug test even though there's no evidence of impairment. And then they canned him for that. Remember, he was a quadriplegic who would, was using a chair and so forth. And the state Supreme Court said that the statute that regulated companies from being able to fire people for legal off-hours activities did not apply to somebody because of cannabis being still illegal under federal law. We can change that on the state level, and we should be contacting our legislators to do that. As we also know, tomorrow is Opioid Awareness Day. Obviously, some really bad policy choices have gotten us where we are with a lot of people who are suffering from opioid addiction. But having said that, we don't want to use this as an excuse to crank out the drug war. Certainly, I'm not a fan of the pharmaceutical industry having a stranglehold on a lot of our medications and all of our remedies, but that doesn't mean that I want to see people being busted for being addicts. Criminalizing addiction does not work, and it won't work for this. Having said that, though, we still need to hold accountable the drug companies who do things to unduly influence doctors in terms of their prescribing decisions. We also need to look at science. Actually brought to my attention that there's a study that they're doing in terms of opioids versus cannabis. And we do know that in states where there is access to cannabis on a medical level, that there are fewer deaths from opioid overdoses. Having those other options for people will help many people not have to use opioids to begin with, and for those who still need them, use a lot fewer of them. In other words, increasing overall health, increasing wellness, and healing. You know, what we're all about in this movement is healing, about personal choices in regards to your body, but also making sure that large institutions like the pharmaceutical industry, that law enforcement communities aren't there to unduly get in the way of freedom. You know, I do support a regulatory framework. If you buy something, you should know what's in it and have it, as much information so you can make intelligent decisions. That's important. There are some other things about collecting data on cannabis as well. I don't want to bore anybody with all the statistics and so forth, but we do know that there are studies happening. There was recently a study that was done with the Adams County Sheriff's Department, and there were some studies regarding effects of alcohol, cannabis, and texting. And of course, texting was the one that created the most problems in terms of people being able to drive. One of the things we can do on the state level is to encourage our legislators to rethink how we enforce driving under the influence laws relating to cannabis, because there are some studies that show that having a high THC level in and of itself doesn't necessarily mean you're impaired. So they need to go back to the drawing board and actually look at the actual science as opposed to one study that was taken out of context, which is how they got the 5 nanogram thing. And while having an inference is better than per se, the problem is, because of the inference, that means if you are accused, you may have to go out and spend a ton of dough to hire an expert and get an attorney to fight your case in court. And we should make that where people who are truly impaired get held accountable, but people who are not impaired should not be dragged into the system. So this is where you guys come in, contacting your legislators, and they're all on the campaign trail now. You can hit them up, you can show up to their events, ask the questions that need to be asked. When they get into office, you can hit them up and say, look, these are things that are important, and this is why. There's another study that's going to be conducted at the University of Colorado in Denver. They're inviting people to sign up if you're a cannabis consumer. Basically, if you're a regular driver who uses cannabis, they encourage you to sign up. So I'll give you the website, and you can check it out for yourself. uncdenver.edu/driving. So check it out and see if that's something you might want to check into. I think cannabis legalization is working. I think many of us in this movement think it's working too. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't be paying attention, because bad things happen when we snooze. 1220 and 1221 that were passed in 2017 are some good examples of that. I think that's one of the things we should also hit up our legislators about as well, is trying to undo the damage of those. The law exists where you can go after people who are doing inappropriate things, who are involved more with cartel level of involvement, instead of having to bust people for mere zoning violations or because they want to arbitrarily limit the amount of plants that a patient needs. I knew a young man in Denver who had a 22 plant authorization for his disease, and he had 15 plants. The cops made him destroy 3 plants. So that's that much less medicine that he had access to. So that's just not acceptable. And of course, we still have what I call the reefer madness phenomenon. But I can tell you this much: when you go outside, you look up at the sky, it's still up there. It has not fallen. So the studies show that these laws are not associated with criminal activity. The fact that we have a regulatory framework keeps cannabis out of the hands of underage people who aren't patients. So I think that is a good thing, because if you're a young person, your brain is not fully developed. And of course, you're not mature enough to be able to figure out what are the effects of things I put into my body. So, and what's the statistic that Ashley passed along to me? More than 150,000 full-time jobs have been created as a result of legalization. That's a lot of taxpayers, that's a lot of people who are part of the community, that's a lot of people who can stimulate the economy by, they go out and support other businesses. And so I think, it's a good business move. Support your local cannabis purveyor, support your local hemp purveyor. Also, we want to insert a shameless plug for NORML itself. We're part of Colorado NORML. NORML was founded in 1970. We invite people to get on our mailing list. We have an email list. That way we can let people know when things are coming up, when it's important to contact your legislators. The session will start again in January. The election is November 6th. Ballots will drop in the middle of October. So please join us. Please be a part of this movement, which is about health, safety, freedom, social justice, environmental sustainability. You name the issue, having freedom for cannabis is a part of that.
Thank you. So EBU is one of the leading pharmacology and genetic companies globally right now, focused on kind of next generation of what's happening from a cannabis perspective. When I started it, I was much more focused on, I'm getting attacked by flies again up here. I was much more focused on potentially being a product company was the idea, and as we got into this, we quickly started realizing this was really hard, and that the work that we were doing applied to so many different things and so many different products. And so we strategically shifted. I killed pretty much most of my products in the marketplace, and we're really more of a licensing company now. So think of us more like Intel Inside. We're in conversations pretty much with any of the big guys who are in the marketplace and small folks, right? It's going to take a big combination of folks. And so we've announced deals like the guy who created Blue Moon Beer, we're in partnership with. We're going to be launching a real non-alcoholic, awesome tasting, beer beverages with exact precise highs every single time in those type of beverages. We just announced the first wine deal. So it's a non-alcoholic wine that's going to be distributed in California, also with similar formulations. We have lined up about 27 different beverage deals right now. But the stuff I'm really excited about is probably more on the medical side. We've done incredible work on serotonin receptors, CB2, capsaicin receptor, et cetera. Very much focused on things like anxiety, pain, depression, and with the goal of getting those into real clinical trials sometime within the next year. Yep.
Question? I have one for Ari. What do you think it will take for hemp to become and replace things like plastic to become more mainstream? Do you think it's legislation that's blocking it? Do you think it's prejudices that are blocking it? Do you think it's money or?
It's all of the above. For example, there's still a lot of kind of negative chatter from law enforcement agencies, surprisingly enough, regardless of how far we are ahead on, medical and recreational cannabis, they're still very concerned about being able to tell the difference between an industrial hemp plant and a recreational or medical cannabis plant, even though there's hundreds of countries throughout the world that have no problem regulating it as such. For an example, we were at, Jared Polis holds, hemp events on Capitol Hill once a year called Hemp on the Hill. And we were there, this was 2016 when we were there, and there was actual law enforcement agencies from Kansas and Nebraska petitioning outside of on the Hill saying that, this was a bad idea, that they would not be able to regulate it. They couldn't, and it really, in my opinion, comes down to them just worried about their federal dollars. So they get millions of dollars a year to go into these random fields in Nebraska and Kansas along the railroads and pull weeds out of the ground that nobody's even caring about. And so that is kind of the last thing that they're really holding on to as far as just getting that federal funding. But what's going to change it, and it's already happening with CBD, obviously, that was the thing that kind of was the trigger, I think, for the hemp industry. And what that trigger was big tobacco. Big Tobacco is obviously just scrambling, trying to pick straws and figure out what crop they're going to replace tobacco with. And they've known about industrial hemp and didn't really get them excited when they were talking about seeds and fiber. But once you start talking about cannabinoid production, then all of a sudden their ears perk up and they say, wait, how much money can I make per acre? And that's when things started to shift. And that's when you've got Republicans like Mitch McConnell saying, yes, this needs to be done. It needs to be done this year. So, I mean, I'm very bullish on the industry in general, and it always comes down to dollars.
I just want to interject one thing. I'm glad we have the business end of it, but I am still troubled when I see drug war ideologues who are in positions of power and pass legislation to lock people up, and then all of a sudden they see the light when they're making a ton of dough on the deal, and meanwhile those people that got busted still have the criminal records, still barred from the industry. We need to rethink that. That is so wrong.
Whoever wants to answer is, we've seen a lot of changes in the cannabis industry, a lot of new money coming in. Have you, any of you, seen a difference in purpose-driven companies versus more profit-driven companies now?
Tackle it first. KindColorado?
Yes,
With new money coming into the industry, have we seen companies change from being kind of purpose-driven to much more profit-driven?
so actually I think we're going to see the opposite, because when VC moves into the sector from other industries, they understand the function of CSR as being a need to have and not a nice to have for profitability and growth and business sustainability. So what we hope for is that as more mature business owners, not saying that cannabis business owners aren't, but as we see business owners who have been in other industries for a long time have access to capital, they're going to build CSR as a function of their business and financial plan from the beginning, rather than looking at CSR retroactively. I think that's a hope and probably not totally realized, but I hope that that happens.
And we have also seen the exact opposite. We have seen a company that we work with pretty closely change when folks from Wall Street came in, and we've seen lots of turnover, and we're not quite sure in that example what leadership does care about. And so we're coming at it much more from a return on investment, but the purpose, we're a little worried about. And we have a reputation in the community as cannabis folks, and we have to stick to being about something. You can't just, you can't just do that, but we are seeing it. So I hope what Courtney's saying is true, but probably they're both true.
No, I was just going to add, because we are a products company, and so we deal directly with grocery buyers every single day, and, we do sell a CBD product, and they, these are natural food stores, so they're getting asked 3-4 times a day, hey, can you carry my CBD product? Hey, can you carry mine? It's the best, it's the best. And they really don't know, how do I choose this company over this company? I mean, they only have 12 inches of shelf space for these products. They can only pick 5 to 10 brands. How do they know who to pick? And really, it comes down to what else is behind the brand. Everybody's got great products. Everybody's, sourcing, hemp from cool places. But it's like, what else are you doing that can really, it's all about making their job easier. So when the customers come in and say, hey, you have all these great products, which one should I buy? And they stand there like, I don't know, they're all the same. And it's just those stories behind it. So for us, for example, we work with a Native American tribe, the Lakota tribe in the Pine Ridge Reservation. So a gentleman named Alex Whiteplume is cultivating all of a flower for our CBD production, with the intent of building a real industry in Pine Ridge, which is the poorest community in the United States. And so, it's very authentic. I mean, our whole mission is, really reviving poor rural communities. So it's not something that we just did for marketing purposes. But, that makes a difference. And that's definitely helping get the product on the shelf.
I'll probably say a slightly different view on it, just based on who we're interacting with. To give a different perspective that's probably a bit more global in perspective of what's happening right now. Obviously, what we're seeing in Canada is that there's a less expensive access to capital, right? And so there's obviously a lot of movement happening right now on the Canadian front and some other places. And you know, everyone in this room has done a hell of a good job that, the cheaper access to capital combined with such a strong movement that's happened so far is actually causing problems in a lot of industries, right? The most obvious one that we're seeing right now is the alcohol industry, right? And all we've seen right now is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of alcohol companies coming into this space, right? And the big news that happened was less that $4 billion got dumped into this industry. The bigger news is that the largest cannabis company right now in the world is actually owned by a alcohol company, or is controlled by an alcohol company, right? Molson Coors has just made the move. There's a lot of noise about Diageo. I guarantee you're going to see, every single player has to move in this space because there's such a major shift right now towards health and wellness. Sugar beverage companies, you're going to see them moving into this space, right? Sugar's under attack, right? And so we're going to start seeing, don't be surprised if you're seeing Coca-Colas and Pepsis and all of these guys start coming into this space. My friend here already talked about, tobacco coming into this space. Now, most of them are going to want an open marketplace, but the question is, what's their reason for getting into this space? And you have a mix between some of these folks who are getting in this because I actually think they believe in this space, right? Someone doesn't take the first move advantage and dump $4 billion in this marketplace because they don't believe in it, right? I actually think they have a strong purpose in why they're coming into this space. I think you're going to see a number of others that feel like they're moving into space because they have no choice, right? I mean, that's my general impression from what I see that's happening at this point. And I think it'll become obvious in terms of who really believes in this and who has no choice but to be here, right? Be my perspective.
I do know there was a bill passed, sponsored by Representatives Janal and Buckner that dealt with some of these issues. There was a bill passed that would authorize the use of a product that has, and I'm trying to remember the specific disease, and I can't remember the name of the company, but it was a fairly large company from out of the country that came to lobby for this particular bill. In essence, that was GW, that bill. And I had some real concerns about it. I think many people did too. They were ostensibly adding some language to it that were supposed to ameliorate those concerns because, yeah, you've got this great product, but most people can't afford it, and many insurance companies aren't going to authorize it. You look at how health insurance companies roll is that they're not looking to heal people or treat people for their disease. They're looking to make money, and anything they do is on a grudging basis. And so we have to watch for the GW pharmaceutical bills of the world. We do have a hemp as food bill that was passed this year, Joe Salazar's bill, which I think will help us, at least on the state level. But this is another thing. We have a lot of say-so in terms of how the business industry is shaped, but that means we have to get a hold of our legislators, and we also have to be intelligent as consumers. We need to make sure to support the businesses who are decent corporate citizens, who give back to the community, who believe in the plant, and ideally who believed in the plant even before people realized you make a ton of dough on it. The late Hunter S. Thompson talked about greening hippie capitalists, and I think any industry is going to have that element. And unfortunately, we do run up against the inherent tendencies of capitalism to consolidate and to mow people over, and that's a whole other discussion for another day. But I think we do have some power as consumers, citizens, and we can lobby our people for a market that does accommodate patients and accommodates consumers and also allows people to make a living but doesn't steamroll people. Do we have the will to do that? I think we do.
Right, so I think that's even
There's always discussion about reschedule versus deschedule. What we want to do with cannabis is make it clear that we want descheduling. Rescheduling just puts it under Schedule 2 or some other schedule, and that's not as going to be helpful to consumers and patients. I'm not saying it should be totally unregulated, because yeah, if you're selling something that's essentially got CBD or cannabis or hemp, consumers have the right to know what they're getting, so they can make informed decisions. But I think you're concerned about the GW bill is legit in terms of what the FDA is going to do. And of course, other agencies, the DEA, and of course, law enforcement still wants their cut in the piece of the action. So I share those worries with you about the GW bill. And to state the question, it was expressing concerns about the GW pharma bill that passed earlier in the state, and of course, the concerns of what happens with if we just have a rescheduling to put it more within the framework of the pharmaceutical thing.
So my focus, as I mentioned, is in compliance and operations, and I'm also really passionate about supporting small and medium-sized businesses to help maintain diversity within the industry. And I think the more resources we can provide to these types of businesses, and the more cost-effective we can make compliance and operations services in particular, the better ability they're going to have to stay in the game and demonstrate that we can be responsible as an industry. We can follow the rules, we can follow the guidelines, I just wanted to mention that there are some of us out there that are looking at it from that perspective as well. How do we keep the industry diversity and still create a thriving industry that meets the needs of consumers and adheres to public safety as well within all of our local communities?
I was going to jump in on that one. So the real answer is it's a mess, and it's going to be a mess for a while, right? I mean, the reality is pharma will come. Right? Pharma makes $500 billion a year, right? Pharma's going to figure out some way that makes some of this prescription, right? Honestly, the best defense is going to be the other industries coming in, getting aggressive in this industry, and also lobbying against these guys basically owning everything is my best guess of what's going to happen, right? And the big challenge that we have is what's the dividing line between these things? We're essentially using the same compounds. There's not a great model right now from a legislative perspective to say, oh, this over here should be prescription and this over here should be the open marketplace, right? And you know, there's some of us who are already starting to have this conversation because we recognize it's a mess, right? Obviously, we're going to fight like hell to make sure we have great recreational products, great lifestyle products, great nutraceutical style products, but there will be prescriptions. And so, you know, I think, you know, no one knows the answer. It's a ridiculously ugly gray area in terms of what this looks like, and it's going to be a long time before we really know the answer. The challenge with some of this, I want to repeat that one. There's potentially the threat that GW, because they got this prescription, may, you know, say, okay, we're going to extend this to all CBD, and then, you know, try to basically control the one compound through the actual creation of this, and, you know, try to basically schedule it in such a way that they can control this is ultimately what it comes down to. So CBD is an ugly one, right? Because there's not a lot of proof points that CBD was sold as an individualized compound and has commercial opportunities in the marketplace before these guys actually did a filing related to the creation of this drug. And it's actually causing a problem in a lot of the legal circles right now for the people who are trying to fight this, right? We're purposely trying to come up with some commercial applications associated with some of the other cannabinoids to get some commercial versions of some of these other purified cannabinoids in the marketplace very quickly in order to kind of protect those in the future from being in a place where it's going to be really hard to fight something like that happening. Now, do I think they're going to be able to do that with all CBD? No, the market's too big, but there's still going to be a hell of a fight.
So the question is why don't we have more standardization within the industry itself? Is it because we're too small at this point? From my perspective, I think it is a new industry, but primarily the initial individuals who got involved in the industry were individuals who were passionate about the plant. They believed in the plant. They weren't necessarily in it for the money. They weren't necessarily your seasoned business owners. They were in it for the bigger purpose. And with that came a lot of chaos and a lot of inability to really wrangle the business from a really professional perspective. We're starting to see that change as we see more money. As the risk is reduced, we're seeing more money flooding into the market, right? So with that comes more experienced business individuals who are, your bigger companies do have a lot more standardization. The smaller companies that I'm working with, they're not even following a lot of the basic rules that we're required to follow for cannabis businesses in Colorado. And that's where I'm trying to assist and help shore up their compliance and operations and make it more consistent and standardized.
I come from the food side of the industry, so it's slightly different, but there's a lot of, similarities. For example, with industrial hemp in the United States, there's no GRAS program, so there's no government standards for agricultural practices. For example, Canada has been growing industrial hemp since 1998, and this year was the first year that they actually got standards put in place for industrial hemp. So it took about 20 years of constant farming and back and forth, and eventually now that there's actually in Canada regulations as far as growing. But for our business, we have USDA organic products, so we're regulated by the USDA. We follow the exact same procedures and protocols as really any other food product.
And the lack of ability for federal government not allowing research, there's all sorts of reasons. The industry being almost always in the defensive position. That's one of the things that we really push is about leading on social responsibility so that we are the ones that craft the best practices that are acceptable and actually what we want to do. That's very different than constantly being a reactive position because you're going to be, something new regulatory oppressive thing's going to be placed upon you. So you have to have creative space and time, not feel under attack. You have to have folks come together and agree. That's also pretty tricky when we're all super different, even though we're in the same sector. So it's a matter of time, but also you need those studies, you need the case studies, you need the evaluative material to say that this is best practice, and we're just super new at that.
I'm going to give you one example of potentially how hard some of the standardization might be in this industry over a period of time. So, as it was referenced earlier, just talking about the amount of THC in a product really doesn't mean anything, right? So here's just some stats that come right out of the lab. So if we take purified THC and we apply it to a CB1 receptor, so that's the one in your brain that makes you feel high, and we're able to normalize the way we measure it, we see only about a 40% reaction on that receptor site. It's what's called a partial agonist. If we actually reduce the amount of THC and add in a couple very specific cannabinoids and a couple very specific terpenes, we'll actually boost that reaction to 80% while tripling the potency. If we choose a couple other cannabinoids and terpenes, we'll make that reaction down to 15% and wipe out the potency, right? So same level of THC, we could have as much as a 20x difference in the reaction that the person's having based on the presence of other compounds that are there. And so part of this, some of the conversations that are being had is how do we then measure the strength of an experience for an end consumer? And we just don't know yet, right? And these are a lot of the things that we still have to figure out. I think there's opportunities to standardize advertising, standardize testing, because testing is just a disaster at this point. But there's a lot in this industry. It's going to take us decades to really figure out how to truly standardize what the experiences end consumers are going to have.
I share, okay, the questioner had expressed a concern about the monopolization of this industry, and I share those concerns as a consumer, knowing people who are patients, and any industry that gets increasingly concentrated, by definition, is going to be beneficial for a very few players and not so much for everyone else. And I think it's a legitimate concern. Part of our movement has to insist on a competitive economic model. There will be some barriers to entry to a certain extent, talking economic language, but they shouldn't be so high, if you'll excuse the pun, where people can't actually get in and be able to provide a legitimate service. Part of the problem we have overall is that both major parties have seen antitrust enforcement as a low priority, and that's something we need to rethink. We also, as consumers, need to think, okay, maybe that local mom and pop shop sells something for a few dollars more, or I can get it at the Walmart and pay a lot less. Truthfully, some people can't afford to shop at the mom and pop because their cash flow is such that they can barely afford to get to Walmart, much less to the mom and pop place. But if we can afford it, we should be doing as much to support local business as possible. That's a choice we can make as consumers. If we go to the Amazons of the world, the people who exploit other people, people who have bad economic practices, then that's what we're going to end up with. We're going to end up with low-grade cannabis, sold by the tobacco companies, and truthfully, I'll quit using it at that point, if that's all we can get. But I think, fortunately, we have the power as consumers and as people who will lobby our legislators to try for a different economic model. And of course, there's a line from an old song, save your seeds.
As I mentioned, one thing that I'm working on is coming up with innovative products to help reduce the cost of compliance for smaller and medium-sized businesses. And so I think it's really important that we maintain that diversity. It's really incredibly important for consumers and for the industry itself. I think something that we should start to look at a little bit more, and something that I'm doing as a B2B business owner, is creating collectives or cooperatives. So business owners, similar type business owners, can actually group together and maybe harness some more power that way instead of just kind of going it alone. Business owners with similar mentalities or similar, drives or, their purpose behind their business. I think if they could band together, maybe work together a little bit better and maybe recognize their similarities and compete against the bigger guys together, that might help.
Yeah, I'm in one of the most competitive, consolidated industries in the world, food and beverage. There's about 6 companies that control probably 90% of the products in your grocery store. So, it's kind of inevitable with an industry, but there's a little bit of, silver lining, I think. From my perspective, it really has to do with direct-to-consumer, and I realize with cannabis right now, that's very hard or nearly impossible to do, but I do think that that's going to change. I mean, there's direct-to-consumer pharmaceutical drugs. I can go on a website, I can fill out a form, and within 12 hours, a doctor can go through it and send me whatever pharmaceutical drug I want. I can do that with alcohol. So, it's a matter of time before we can do that with cannabis, and I think that that's where small and medium-sized businesses can thrive. Because, it's going to be trouble. It's going to be harder for a cannabis company than, say, my company. But I still deal with, restrictions being an industrial hemp company. Like, I got kicked off of my payment processor recently after being with them for 6 years. So we deal with that same stuff that's direct to consumer. But, I look at the wine industry, and I think the wine industry is a great example of how really small boutique wineries can make a substantial living. And I think that's only going to grow with direct-to-consumer, and people stop going to liquor stores, and people finding out about, the small local winery on their Facebook page or on their YouTube channel, found out, have that really connection with that small company and are willing to support it. So I do think that there's going to be a revitalization of small, medium-sized cannabis companies once the regulations kind of allow it.
Sure. The reality is, in any marketplace that you have an open marketplace and an unlimited number of licenses, this was going to happen, right? You can't control supply and demand, right? What that means is you're going to have some people coming in with more money. They're going to be able to drive down the cost. And if you're growing Blue Dream and the other person's growing Blue Dream, maybe yours is slightly better, but if the other person's selling it at half the price, right, the consumer's going to vote that way. It's really hard to do, right? I mean, the way the rules and regulations are set up, this was naturally going to happen. And I think as time evolves, we're still going to have 20% of the marketplace that'll probably be buying flower, right, 5-10 years from now. But the companies are going to be around and surviving in that type of atmosphere. They're going to be the ones to figure out how to differentiate themselves somehow from everyone else. If you're trying to grow the exact same product as the guy next door, or the gal next door, or the gal next door, it's going to be really hard to compete. And that's just what happens in these open type of marketplaces. And I don't think anyone in here wants us to really push for some type of regulated, there's a certain limited number of licenses, because that obviously creates a whole other problem too. It's just the natural dynamics that we see in these type of marketplaces, and we wish, we'd love to see tons of mom and pops, but it's just the natural thing I think that happens.
So my answer won't surprise you, and I don't think it's a cure-all, but certainly I think when we talk about customer engagement and customer choice from the perspective of being a purpose-driven company, I think there's some understated power there. And I think that retailers put, by proxy of many things, a lot of power into bud tenders' hands. And so if a customer is coming in and looking for a certain product, however that bud tender's been influenced, whether it's by price or by loyalty or a bud tender education night or whatever happened, that may be what's moving certain product off the shelves. If we can take some power, to Ari's point, and give it to consumers, I think that we ensure some more diversity in what's in the marketplace. Again, I don't think it's a cure-all. Yeah, fingers crossed. I don't think it's a cure-all. But I think that what we know, again, 90% of consumers, 90% will choose a product that is purpose-driven over a product that isn't when price and quality are the same. So that's a powerful number to think about, because maybe you have to lower price, but if you have enough customer loyalty and enough capital and sustainable business to override the company that's trying to outbeat you on price, but is not purpose-driven, there's a good chance you will survive. Because the number for companies that are... So there's another statistic that comes out of Conscious Company magazine that says 70% of consumers, this is a little bit less, but still profound, 70% of consumers will choose a product that is purpose-driven and more expensive over a product that is less expensive and not purpose-driven. So again, I don't think it's a cure-all. I think there's so many factors that play into this, but I do believe that craft cannabis can survive.
And the ink still is not dry on all the ways we've decided to operate. So we said that that's just the way it is. And I know it's big to talk about different economic models, but we actually do have choices in cannabis. Colorado policy doesn't really currently support different co-ops and guilds and et cetera, but other states do. And so because we passed the laws that we passed because we were first, and it was a lot of advocates that came together and did their very best, and we're grateful to them. There's been some good consequences and some unintended consequences, but all of that thinking's not done. And so there's nothing like cannabis fellows, where there's like a multidisciplinary group of folks thinking about, in terms of city planning, zoning, economic diversity, all of the things that we value. If we want to have an opportunity to experiment in this absolutely new space, we can do that. We're hyper-local right now, which actually provides us some protections to test some things out. When we're federal, I mean, it's going to grow where it rains. I mean, there's huge changes coming, right? Really. So it's time to think about what are some very innovative ways to bring new people into the sector, and we don't have to do it the way that we've always done it. And I understand how things work. I spend dollars and all of that, but we really can be more creative than we are currently being to mitigate some of those exact things that are absolutely happening, and it's an issue, and some will survive.
Personally, dosing, and I also feel that there's a lot of people jumping on the bandwagon, selling products that they're making, and I don't know where the credibility is anymore.
Can you repeat that question?
So the question was related to CBD, kind of almost like fact and fiction. What's in the marketplace today? What can you believe as it relates to CBD? You know, do you feel comfortable related to it, right? No surprise, my answer is going to be, you know, CBD is not the end-all, be-all for everything, even though it seems to be positioned that way. Does it have some benefits? Sure. Right? And we've seen those benefits depending on the specific application, but it's not an end-all be-all for certain things. You know, I can share that, you know, CBD as it relates to serotonin receptor 1A and serotonin receptor 2A has some really interesting benefits that probably do work for certain types of people who are looking for things as it relates to anxiety and depression. Right? Are we ever going to be the ones out there giving that medical advice today? No, right? But I'd love to get something in the marketplace that has some CBD combined with actually a couple very specific, you know, one other cannabinoid and 2 terpenes that we think is going to be very beneficial, right? Will CBD work for all pain? No. Could it work for some specific types of pain? Possibly, right? Pain's actually a really complicated one. There's actually 11 different sources of pain in the body, and depending on actually where the pain is coming from, it may or may not be effective. You know, the difference between, you know, what kind of happened in the marketplace is you started with these kind of whole extracts from the plant, and then because those whole extracts contain some levels of THC, all of a sudden you saw this massive isolation movement in order to basically try to remove the THC from this, and all of a sudden the marketplace took off because here you go, CBD, which you're not going to feel anything really when you take it for the most part, exploded in the marketplace, and now you kind of have a bunch of people trying to push back to the full spectrum side of things, but then having problems once again with the THC side of things. Depending on what's in there, it may or not be more effective for you, right? I mean, at the end of the day, this is all the work that we're actually doing because I wanted to understand why, right? It's kind of a really important question that most people aren't asking in this industry today, which is, why does this work, right? Why do we have certain benefits? What is the right combination of things? And if we actually can prove the benefits of those things, how do we get those into the right folks' hands, right? And a really challenging example, I'll actually pick on CBG, for example, right? There's actually studies related to CBG that it reduces the intraocular pressure for people with glaucoma, right? But let's say you go to your doctor and your doctor says, well, maybe you need some cannabis, right? Well, and the person goes into the dispensary today, says, okay, I need some cannabis. Well, you know, probably 40 to 45% of the cannabis that's in that store has some level of CBG. It probably is not enough of it. It probably goes too fast, and they're not going to really experience the benefit that's possible with CBG. Versus a future world where we actually start looking at medicine a different way, where we know that we could basically create a concentrated product that we could actually do in terms of a dose, and we know what it is every single time, so that person can, you know, appropriately take that medicine, right, in a way that's going to be really healthy for their body. They're going to get the benefit, and they're going to get it every single time. Right? And this is, I mean, literally we're at the tip of the iceberg of understanding this stuff. So you're not wrong in terms of, you know, kind of the fact and fiction question and everything that's out there, right? There's lots of claims, and the part that I spend a lot of time laughing at is there's a whole bunch of anecdotal information in this industry about, like, what does myrcene do? Or, you know, CBD makes you unhigh after you take THC and all this type of stuff. And the fact of the matter is, you know, at least half of it's wrong. Right? But what happens is most people aren't doing the work, and a lot of the information is not coming out yet. And so one person hears it, and then they copy it, and they put it on their website. And so the next person takes it, and they've been putting it on their website. And then somehow it's like, you know, this phone tree that keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, right? Without the actual real work that needs to happen, right? So the good news is there is some real work that's happening right now, right? It needs to be 100 times greater than really what it is. And I think we're going to end up in a world, you know, probably 10 to 20 years from now, where don't be surprised if you walk in your grocery store and your shampoos and your dog food and your sports creams and your lotions and all these different things are going to have different cannabinoids in them, right? With different known benefits that are going to improve your life, right? We just have to do the work to actually understand what it is and be able to actually create those products. She's not eating cat food, just to be clear. That's what she said. Dog food? No. She's not eating dog food, too.
I was just going to chime in real quick, just because I have a different perspective on it. I come from nutritional, supplement kind of side of the industry, right? So for me, cannabinoids are the same things as vitamins and minerals and omega-3 fatty acids. Really, I don't see the difference in any of them, right? It's preventative. It's the same reason, like, why would you take CBD? It's like, why do you take vitamin C? Why do you take a multivitamin? Why are we taking omega-3 fats? It's like, if I take a fish oil supplement, I don't feel any better, but it's the thought of in 40 years and 30 years, whatever that is, I'm going to be living a healthier, happier life because science, studies have kind of shown that it can help, prevent or treat these things. And the couple main ones for me personally is like Alzheimer's and dementia. I mean, my grandmother had dementia and Alzheimer's. My grandfather has dementia and Alzheimer's. It's a genetic, passed on genetically. So it's something that I take very seriously. And I wonder, what are kind of some steps that I can take as a 30-year-old individual that in 30 and 60 years that I can hopefully not get the Alzheimer's and dementia, or maybe hopefully I can make it to 95 before it affects me, kind of thing. So for me, it's really just it's a preventative supplement, and also I believe that because of our environment and our stress, we're cannabinoid deficient. Our endocannabinoid system is deficient, and we should be supplementing it just like we supplement greens or or protein. Well, I think industrial hemp is about to become federally legal, so that's step one, I guess.
The sooner we have the political will to make our elected officials have the political will, the sooner it will be legalized nationwide. Hopefully sooner rather than later.
Yes.
All right, thank you all, everyone, for coming out. Please visit the booths, the vendor booths, and we will see you next year at the 4th Annual Cannabis Symposium, where we're going to double it.
This video was produced by Boulder Digital Arts. BDA offers affordable, cutting-edge classes and workshops for designers, entrepreneurs, and tech professionals. All of their programs are taught by industry experts. And as a small local business, they're proud to have supported Boulder's creative and technology community for well over a decade. BDA's classes cover a wide range of subjects, from digital marketing and video production to web development and graphic design. Learn more at boulderdigitalarts.com.